As in most things in Ireland, it takes a tragedy to get our politicians to do anything. It's very much a pick up the pieces policy rather than a prevention at source policy. We have seen it in child protection. We have seen it in special needs education, even in road traffic legislation. And that makes a good metaphor for how our political leaders run this country. We wait until someone gets knocked down and killed, and then we put up the stop sign at that dangerous intersection that people have been complaining about for years. The same is true when we consider the pandemic in this country that is domestic abuse. The minister is shouting from the rooftops about Jenny's Law, not mentioning that it was only introduced for cabinet approval in June 2026, despite the fact that Jenny Poole was murdered in April 2021. It has taken 5 years for the government to get this far, largely due to a brave and tireless campaign by Jenny's family. Were it not for their campaign, I have no doubt that there would be no legislation at all. And when it is finally enacted, that law will immediately have serious shortcomings, as it does not go nearly far enough. If we can't appeal to their sense of decency, then perhaps we should appeal to that place that they most definitely feel, their pocket. Money is the politicians' testicles, very sensitive. And whilst I find it repugnant and immoral to place a monetary value on human life, if that is the only language politicians speak, then in this instance we have no choice but to speak their language. Research carried out by Safe Ireland and the Centre for Global Women's Studies at the University of Galway found that domestic violence costs Ireland approximately €2.7 billion annually, including healthcare, policing, courts, lost productivity, housing, social protection, and the direct costs borne by victims and their families. The study estimated that an individual woman experiencing domestic abuse incurs costs averaging almost €113,500 over a 20-year period, producing an estimated cumulative cost of €56 billion for survivors nationally. This was based on prevalence data from the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. If you mention those sort of figures, you'll see the minister drop his hands over his sensitive bits before you can blink. And that research was carried out in 2021, so God only knows what the figure is now. The annual cost of maintaining a prison place in Ireland has now exceeded €100,000 per prisoner per year, with recent figures placing it at approximately €103,334 annually. Rising staffing costs, inflation and prison overcrowding have contributed to this increase. Therefore, a domestic homicide resulting in a conviction can involve criminal investigation costs, court and prosecution costs of €150,000 to in excess of €500,000, imprisonment costs of over €100,000 per year for potentially decades, additional social costs to children, families and communities, and that is just for the domestic homicides. According to Women's AIDS Femicide Watch, 284 women have died violently in the Republic of Ireland since 1996. Of those deaths, 87% of women were killed by a man known to them. The majority of these killings were committed by a current or former intimate partner, making intimate partner homicide the single largest category of femicide in Ireland. What of the costs associated with imprisonment for lesser offences against an intimate partner? The numbers are mind-boggling. What does it say of our society that we have to plead with the government to stop domestic abuse as a cost-saving exercise? If that is the only language they understand, then what choice do we have? Evidence increasingly suggests that the greatest savings come not from reacting to abuse after serious harm occurs, but from preventing escalation. Examples include training frontline professionals to identify coercive control and high-risk cases early, using structured domestic abuse risk assessment tools, rapid referral of high-risk victims and perpetrators to multi-agency intervention teams, earlier perpetrator management and monitoring, improved housing and support services for victims to allow safe separation from offenders. A frequently recommended model is the use of multi-agency risk assessment conferences, MARCs, where police, health services, Social services and specialist domestic abuse organisations share information and coordinate responses to high-risk cases. Evidence from several jurisdictions suggests that MARACs reduce repeat victimisation and domestic homicides, which in turn reduces long-term costs to the justice and health systems. In purely economic terms, preventing even a small number of high-risk cases from escalating into serious assaults or homicide can avoid hundreds of thousands of euro in prosecution costs, millions in future imprisonment costs, substantial healthcare and social care expenditure, and immeasurable human costs for victims and families. This is what our legislation should be creating. Not a law that may cause a few names of serious criminals to be published on an online register if and when a judge allows it. Prevention is always better than cure. That's why it is a cliché. It has been said so often by so many. We call on the Minister to create legislation that will actually make a difference,